Start
Cool,
recording.
let's do it.
Oh, alrighty. I'm Danny.
I'm Meg.
And we're gonna be talking about brain fart, class size and the class size debate, if there actually is a debate. Um, that on that little paper that we got, that was kind of one of the questions, like, what's the first thoughts about it? And my first thoughts were kind of just like, is there even a debate? I feel like I feel like teachers are kind of just overall like we need smaller classes, right? But
Yeah, I think from the educator's perspective, it's pretty clear that a smaller class size makes for more learning and better education happening.
yeah,
So
and the
that was
only
mine too.
yeah, the debate, I guess, quote unquote, is coming from like districts versus teachers, um, which is also probably contributing to that, 5-year teacher retiring rate that we have going right now.
Mhm.
Because nobody wants to teach a 48 student class.
No, no,
Yeah.
awful. Yeah, that burnout happens real quick. And I think especially because teachers, in a standard job, you have people hired and quitting like kind of all the time. It's just part of the cycle.
Mhm.
But with teachers, you commit to that full year, and you kind of motor through until that
Yeah.
summer
And if
break.
I think they don't talk about too that just like emotional, you know, aspect of it. Just
Huge.
like it's exhausting. I saw a video the other day of like there was a teacher that was like recording. They were like, I get really bad fatigue. So when I get home, I don't want to cook anything or do anything. So he took like a
Mhm.
what are the like the tally thingy where you can like sports people have them and you can like
Yeah.
count the things every single
To
time
count like audience members or whatever. Yeah.
yeah, every
Yeah.
single time he had to make a decision, he clicked it. And by the end of it, like by the end of third period, I think he said he was at like 98. And then it was like 300 or something like that by the end of the day, which is that's a lot of decisions to make.
It's a lot. It's
Yeah.
a whole lot. Well, and especially in teaching, um, yeah, your experience can help guide you to, the most helpful decision in that moment. But
Mhm.
there are things that you run into, even if you've been teaching for a long time, that are new. And
Mhm.
it's a student maybe you haven't worked with before, maybe a student that you haven't interacted with in that particular way. And you got to make a decision, and it might not go the way you hope.
Yeah, or
Um,
even just like going back to the class size, like as class size grows, like that's going to be something that continues to wear on us as well, that continues to create new situations and new like experiences that teachers have never encountered before. I was in my research I was talking about or I was reading about it and it was saying that like a lot of the a lot of the time that is spent teaching like a large class is not really instruction, it's more classroom management, like working on behaviors, making sure people aren't interrupting other people, and so on and so forth. So it's almost like we're not even being teachers anymore. We're just
babysitters.
babysitting and trying to mitigate any kind of issue that crops up. We're not really
Yep.
like instructing the students on whatever subjects that we might like come across.
Sure. And with that larger class size, grading becomes a real burden. And I think it becomes harder and harder to give meaningful feedback, which we know is huge
Mhm.
in the process of learning, that we need to be able to give feedback before their grade is like severely affected,
Yeah,
by
absolutely.
whatever misunderstanding they have.
I feel that way almost even especially about like college classes. Like I don't know if you've had any classes yet where like the professor just doesn't grade anything until like the last and then it turns out that you've been like doing a journal or something wrong the entire time and you're like, so all of my journals are wrong and I've got docked like 10 points per journal. Like that's never happened to me, but that's like my fear in the back of my mind
Yeah,
that that's gonna
for
happen where
sure.
I'm just like, oh my God, can you please just write something so I know what I'm supposed to do?
Yeah, it turns out that feedback's important no matter what age we're talking about. Even
Yeah.
if you're like learning to play an instrument, like you absolutely need that feedback. Like, you're holding the violin wrong or whatever it is,
Mhm.
the earlier you can get that feedback, the quicker you can fix it
Yeah, before you
and
start
start
like a
doing it
habit or
properly.
something that's not right.
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah, so the crux of the issue, it sounds like to me from what we found, what we read, uh, is everybody agrees that a smaller class is at least somewhat beneficial.
mhm.
People will argue how beneficial, but the main issue is it beneficial enough to make up for the cost? Because, well, I mean, everything comes down to the cost, right? But the cost does increase like incredibly very quickly, because if you half a class size, that's double the faculty, um, and double the salaries, and that's a whole lot of money, even even as salaries are, it's a
Yeah,
whole lot of money.
yeah,
So the real question is, does it make enough of a difference
yeah. And it's kind
to be
of crazy
worthwhile?
too, because like I was reading one of my articles that I was reading for this conversation was talking about like just the different variables that can like kind of like show it's whether or not it's the class size that's really the problem. Um,
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
because like I was saying earlier, what it really boils down to is a smaller class size is going to be less classroom management. But then like you had even mentioned earlier too, that like if you don't have the teaching strategies to actually teach when the classroom sizes have condensed, then how good are the students' results going to be, you know? So if you're just like minimizing the classroom size and the teacher is only used to classroom management and now they have to suddenly teach and they don't know what they're doing, it's not going to change anything. The scores are probably still going to be bad. So if you
Right.
have a really excellent teacher that has these awesome classroom management or classroom and awesome learning strategies, but they can't implement them because they're spending too much time on classroom management, that's different. Um, and it brings up a question of like, because these classroom sizes are not going to get smaller. They're continuing to get big, and it's not just an American problem. Like one of my articles that I read was talking about like Nigerian schools,
Mhm,
and they were
yeah.
saying like the classroom sizes average around 50 to 100 students for one teacher, which is insane. And then like how are you even supposed to teach like the classroom size specific problems like one-on-one student to teacher stuff and then small group stuff aside, you can't even have time to teach at that point, like normal, like because you're just going to be like Joe Schmo in the back needs to stop talking to his neighbor.
Well, absolutely. And so I'm a theater educator. So every time we do a summative, not every time, but close to every time, it's a performance.
Mhm.
So if I have 50 kids in my class, just the number of class periods we're going to have to spend, like if we have 2 and 3 people scenes, like we're going to be here forever. It's going to be a month of just
Mhm.
watching people's performances. Um, and you can be creative, you can have them like record their performances, send them in, but then the rest of the class really loses out on seeing the performances, right? And
Mhm.
then I have to carve that time out of my prep time, right, to be watching those and grading those. So there's,
Mhm.
yeah, there's a lot that comes with that huge class size.
Yeah.
Um,
And I
just
guess
makes it
our
harder.
job is like, as educators moving forward, because this is always going to be an issue, would be to figure out how to do that, like how
Yeah,
do we manage that? Like obviously the classroom sizes are not going to go away. The districts are going to continue to push larger classes on us. I've got teachers right now at my school that are fighting to not take on an extra class of students, like because they can't hire someone for another position or something. So class sizes are going to stay the same. So then how are we going to, do those summative performances in your case? I almost wonder, like, would a play, like an actual play where everybody contributes, would that be the same as a summative performance?
I mean, I love the way that you're thinking. I think
Mhm.
that's what we have to do is get really creative. In that particular case, there's so much more to putting on a play, and um, the students, especially in like a beginning drama class, many of them are not ready ready for that level of performance. But I think you have to start thinking that way. Think, outside the box. You have to say,
Like
okay,
everyone can participate, yeah.
right, like, can we find 10-person scenes, like, part of the reason we don't do 10-person scenes is because there aren't that many of them, but like, find them, man. Find the ones that are there and make them happen. I also, um if you did lean into sort of having them perform and record themselves and submit that, maybe each time you have a summative, you have 5 groups that perform live in class in addition to submitting.
Mhm.
So then at least the class benefits from, because part of it is the class giving feedback too. They
Mhm.
need to learn how to give one another feedback in a professional and positive way. Um,
Or even
and
like
yeah.
if you're doing like a segment on monologues, for example, if they're like recording themselves, kind of like what we're doing right now, like where they record themselves and then they post it to a forum, and then you could have the
Sure.
students like respond to three of them, that
Yeah,
could work. Something like that.
that
Mm,
could be great.
yeah, something, because I'm kind of thinking almost just like utilizing the technology that we have to make learning feel a little bit smaller than it is. Like
Sure.
in a theater class, it might be kind of simple, but honestly, like in a general education class, like I'm going to be like an English teacher.
Yeah.
So in that situation, it might be a little bit more difficult unless it's like I mean essays are always a thing, but then you have to grade and
Yeah.
read like 50 essays. Like that's kind of crazy. And then presentations are always a thing, but then you have to like grade and watch, 50 presentations.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, honestly, I've been noticing like just my time in the classroom, like kids just aren't presenting anymore.
Mhm.
And it's kind of like it's wild to me because I'm like, what, how do you just no thanks and move on? Like
Yeah, that required, I mean, I think that's such an important part of the learning that happens in high school is learning how to get up in front of your peers and
Mhm.
say some stuff.
Yeah.
um, uh, yeah, so making sure that you don't lose that, because you could approach presentations in a similar way, have them record them, turn them in, but you don't want to lose the benefits of doing it in person. I think the real challenge is taking some of the strategies, the instructional strategies that we know work well for small groups, right? So student centered learning, project based learning, a lot of this stuff where students have a lot of choice and are kind of in charge of their own project, which is hard in a large group. So, how do you make some of that work in a large group without burning yourself out completely. You know, like, can you make it more of a group thing? Can you, you know, have them self-select topics and then have people with that are interested in the same things work together? You know, what can you do to kind of morph those small group strategies to work in
Yeah.
a larger group?
So I guess at the end of the day, it's not going to be whether or not like small classes affect the students' academics, because like it does,
Mm-hmm.
but it's a combination of like the fact that there are so many students and teachers aren't able to, have those one-on-one experiences with the students, and that this teacher's not able to spend as much time teaching. But more the focus should be on like what are the ways that like what are some better instructional strategies than um to kind of go over the like content that you're covering with a large class. I
Right.
was noticing that when I was doing my research, a lot of the um a lot of the data, quote unquote, that they were getting was not solid because there's so many different aspects around that are like changing things. So like in one of them
Yeah.
it was like that at the same time they had implemented a new curriculum, and they'd had some professional development opportunities that could have provided them better strategies. So they can't 100% contribute the success of the students to just the smaller class sizes, because it could have been the professional development, it could have been the other thing that I said that has already lost.
New curriculum.
Yeah, the new curriculum. It
Yeah.
could have been. So
Yeah.
what is
No,
it?
absolutely. And the other side of that is when they really try to isolate just the class size. The thing is, the class size, the smaller class size is only really valuable if you are changing your instructional strategies, you
Or
know,
if you
if
are
you try,
originally just a good teacher, yeah.
right, but if you try to teach a group of 12 the same way you would teach a group of 35, it doesn't work the same way. You know, you have to adjust the strategies. Yeah, there are um, a lot of studies where they say, oh, you know, testing scores hardly improved, or like there was an improvement to their reading skills, but not really their math. Well, if you're just reducing the class size and nothing else is changing, I mean, sure. You gotta, it really does all kind of have to work together in order to really show big improvements.
Yeah. And I was
Um,
reading some that were multi-year studies, like over the span of like 5 years they followed a class, and they had one class that was like at the very early years they just did small class settings, and then they went into like normal class settings,
mhm.
and the students were able to hold on to those like the knowledge that they gained the first year, and they were better behaved and more so on and so forth like throughout the next ones. But they also saw a decline in those positive behaviors every year that they were in a large class. And then there was also the debate of like, does the class size matter? If it Are we talking across the board, just every class K through 12, or is it better for like the primary grades or the secondary grades to have smaller class sizes? And it's all just like, honestly, it all boils down to like what I've been saying is just the teacher's abilities, honestly.
Absolutely. Well, and one of the things that I've noticed since I was in school and then being a teacher, and um, is I feel like they figured out early-ish on that preschool and kindergarten, you've got to use a variety of instructional strategies. You've got to, have a smaller class. You've got these sorts of things. And then after a while, people are kind of like, wait a minute, this is also helpful in elementary, you know? And if we're changing up our instructional strategies, if we're not just lecturing, you know, they're learning better. Wow, you know. And then it kind of grows through middle school and they're like, whoa, 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 we can do this here. And then
Mhm.
finally it kind of got to high school, right? Where they're like, no, no, you can't stand behind your podium. Sorry.
Yeah,
Um, but when you get past high school, think the assumption becomes like you're a grown up,
figure it
you're on
out.
your own.
You're
Like,
paying for
do
this
as I say,
now,
not as
so
I
figure it
do.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree
Which I think is
100%.
funny. But I think the same thing is true with the realizations about class size. Like, it's vital when they're younger, when they're little, to
Mhm.
have a smaller group so that somebody's paying attention because they have a lot of needs, you know.
Yeah. And it's kind of
um,
giving them, it's kind of like those like foundational building blocks too. It's like if
yes.
you give students like the building blocks to learn at an early age, the hope is that they can hold on to those throughout the rest of their years. So
Right.
if a child is knows how to study properly, then they will be more successful. Whereas
Right.
like honestly for me, and I'm not trying this out. When I say this, it sounds really gross, and I'm not trying to sound like
Cool.
trying to
Cool.
sound
Ready?
like I'm tooting my own
Here for
horn.
it.
But I can honestly say that I have not studied a day in my life, like except for when I was learning Spanish. Spanish is hard. The problem was I got like a C in Spanish because I don't know how to study. I've never had to study before because I've always just had straight A's with no effort put in.
Sure.
So yeah, it's when you get to that point where like you actually have to do something, do the hard thing, it's like, oh, I don't know how to do the hard thing. So
Right. Whereas if you learn those skills early on, then they can
then you
serve
can
you.
apply them to everything else. It's also like math. Like you have to learn the building blocks of your math. You can't go in to do the quadratic formula if you don't know addition.
Right, that would be hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. And I appreciate that they take that care with the earliest grades. I wish we could extend that care
Mhm.
throughout the rest of the educational process. I mean, how many people do you hear say, like, I don't remember anything I learned in high school? Like, I literally had a conversation with someone yesterday who was like,
I don't really talk a
I don't
lot
remember
about
anything.
people who have like any kind of
Yeah.
educational experience. Most of the time was just like what happened in high school, not
Yeah.
necessarily what I learned. I remember a few things that I learned in high school, specifically English and some
Hmm.
stuff, but like math was really hard. So
Mm.
I remember some things, but I can't honestly like I remember the other thing too is I remember the vague idea of it. I don't remember the specifics. So I couldn't like
Sure.
recite Beethoven to you or something like that. I
Sure.
could I could tell you like the general gist.
Right, right, right. Yeah. So anyway, so if our goal is for people to remember specific things that they learned, mm.
We might not be succeeding on that.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, um, yeah, but it does. I think it's interesting that most of the research, it really, really depends on the specific study what the conclusions are. Like, we have people who say, oh, this is garbage, there's no reason to do this. People who say this is vital to the survival of, our species.
There's too many
Um,
variables. And
right. So
I don't honestly
yeah,
know if there is a way to do a study without those variables, you know?
no. But I was sort of impressed that there are a lot of districts that are imposing class reductions, um, and making sure that those classes don't get too huge. For everyone who's doing that, there's another district that's not, of course.
Probably, yeah.
But I would expect, with a mixed bag, research
Mhm.
wise, for districts to be like, see, we don't know, you know.
Mhm.
But I wonder if because teachers seem, the ones who are actually in the classrooms are pretty agreed.
Yeah, they're pretty unified on that, opinion for sure.
And we can be loud. We can be loud when we want to be.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
yeah.
So I think that'll definitely be kind of, once they start getting too big, that'll be what ends up happening, is we just be loud about
Content
it.
union.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. I think we
Um,
are gonna run out of our time here
okay, great.
because I guess
I want to mention one more thing that I found just real quick. We don't have to talk about it too much.
no.
But it there's like a shift in understanding the results of these studies from um, does it improve test scores to does it improve teacher working conditions, and does it improve retention of teachers, because that's actually a money saver as well.
Mhm.
So I just thought that was interesting. That's all.
No,
I
that
was
is
like,
really
yeah,
super interesting.
working
Actually, I have
conditions.
in one of my things here too, I have
Mhm.
it saying like regular assignments and homeworks are dreaded by teachers considering the staggering number of books to mark and to record. So it's
Yep.
like, yeah, it's like it is more than just, are the students succeeding, and also on top of that, are we providing humane working conditions for our teachers?
Seriously.
It's like
For sure.
a teacher sweatshop.
A little bit, a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, great. I
Awesome.
think that's,
Alrighty.
we got it.
How do I stop recording? Oh,